Imagine a little girl who is growing up in difficult circumstances where hope seems like a distant future, something you can see but never quite touch. Where despite anger, fear, and frustration, something keeps you going and you don't know what it is. This is my everyday where I don't just feel hopeful but try and practice it every day. I, Natasha Sharma, want to take you into these spaces where we don't just imagine hope or feel hopeful, but we build it together. In October 2022, a 21-year-old boy was murdered by three minors over a mere argument when they were stopped from bursting crackers in a glass bottle. This incident took place in a R&R, which is a rehabilitation and resettlement colony in the M East ward of Mumbai, Govandi, often notorious for crimes. But this particular incident caught the entire city's attention, not just because the murder was over a mere argument, but because the perpetrators were minor children. I remember during a workshop I was conducting with the people there, the women and the mothers were showing concerns about what is this anger, where is this coming from, and what is it that we can do about it. This incident took place right outside a community library I helped build within the community. A 8-year-old girl, Radhika, who's a frequent explorer of this library, curiously came and asked the facilitator around the same time this happened, that library के अंदर आते ही लोग इतने अच्छे क्यों हो जाते हैं? Why do people who enter this library become good people? Now, this sentiment of hers was a way of showing her love for the library, but it also showed how her perception of this good space was a refuge to the bad space outside. And I want you to take a moment to think about a moment in your life or a memory where you felt really safe and cared for despite difficult circumstances around you. This story, among the many stories that I've heard in Govandi, has stayed with me because it has helped me confront the reasons of why I do, the drives of why I do what I do. And I realized the roots of why I do what I do is because of my own personal experiences and my early childhood experiences. I grew up in the suburbs of Mumbai. The only open space my friend and I used to have to hang around were the spaces between cars that were parked or the bikes that were parked. One of us would lean against the bonnet, the other would sit on the bike. None of this space that we could reclaim as ours. My nuclear family of 4 would shift rented houses every 2 to 3 years, depending on our financial capacity, from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, back to a 1-bedroom. Inside my house was an environment of prolonged domestic violence and abuse, one that was normalized but never felt right. I realized my own understanding of safety, agency, and belonging, or rather the lack of it, at home or outside, became the battle that I was fighting with myself. And this is not a sad story, even though it has caused us a lot of pain and struggle. This is the time when we broke our societal and patriarchal barriers and challenged it. This is the time when my mother, my little sister, and I decided to leave our father despite any financial backing or savings. Our aunts and friends came together to support us. And I promised myself as a 15-year-old that I'm not going to take this agency of choice that I have received for granted. Despite financial challenges, my mother was determined कि मेरे दोनों बच्चों को पढ़ाना तो बिल्कुल ज़रूरी है. And you know what happens when mothers, or specifically women, are determined to do something. So I completed my education in Bachelor's of Design from Shrishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology with a hefty loan, one that I was ashamed to share about earlier, but now I hold it with pride. All of these experiences and then my education shaped a lot of how I navigate the world today. But there are a few questions that keep coming back to me. One is, how do I build homes and cities that care? How do I look at the world through the eyes of the children growing up in vulnerable environments? And how can art design be used to create sustainable, non-intrusive, creative and expressive methods where we can reclaim our sense of safety, agency, and belonging? In this quest of trying to find a space that cares, I began to create them. My curiosity of the what-ifs, of the alternate, of the possibilities of hope became practice itself. And the interlinked relationship between social equity, emotional and psychological well-being, and spatial justice became strikingly visible. Now, if the issues are so interdependent, why do we work in silos? Why are these worlds not talking to each other? And how can I, through my practice, create this interdisciplinary discourse? I had to take these big questions I had and put it somewhere. So I started doing small interventions and programs in public spaces. Why public spaces? A, because I had very little of it growing up. B, because that's where the collective reality of the city is produced across socioeconomic backgrounds. And Library of Maths was one such intervention. This intervention required me to install 70 mats on the branches of trees in a public park named Cubbon Park. These mats had no prompts, no branding, no nudges as to what to do with it. It was merely on the public to decide the purpose of it. Eventually, people started using it, putting it down, sitting on it, and putting it back on the trees. This happened over several hours and several days. And you were seeing a mat, which is a mere object, rotated between families for play, interaction, and leisure. In a nutshell, this illustrated the fact that given the opportunity, the public will responsibly take over their public spaces and interact and go beyond the rules of the set place. It also gave us a hint into how if we involve people who we are designing for and instead design with them, perhaps we are creating a more inclusive, accessible, and a place that's more public in nature. The Wait Time project was another one. I was looking at which other public place can I experiment in. And you cannot ignore the big giants, which are the metro stations that are coming up in the city. And I was wondering, what is our relationship with these infrastructural developments? Are they aliens to us, or is there some kind of responsibility that us as citizens have towards that place, and vice versa? The Wait Time project was a very simple and fun intervention. There was, at that time, 6 to 8 minutes wait between two trains. And I wanted to use that wait that's recurring as a place for creating learning environment. So I did an open call and asked the locals, the commuters, cultural practitioners of the city, artists of the city, to send in videos that could be projected between this time, where we can engage with informative and learning content. I got videos of digital scanned books by Pratham Books for Children. I got how to compost videos from Daily Dump. I got videos on zine making, on citizenships and rights, and also a video on how to learn sign languages. This was my way of creating civic participation in spaces that usually don't have that. I moved away from that and started to think about what is that one object that we ignore as much as we ignore our public spaces, and they both work together. And that was garbage. Garbage was this residue of behavior and consumption. The other installation I did was called the Dark Fantasy. It did derive its name from a wrapper of a biscuit dark fantasy. Here, we collected actually the garbage, from different neighborhoods in Bangalore, where I collaborated with artist Manoj John and casted this in resin and created this huge humanoid form of garbage. Just like how we have museum specimens where we are able to see our history and archive of our civilization, well, garbage becomes a way to look at that as well. I continued making because I realized that I really loved this more than I feared failing at it. The public space became my kitchen. Art interventions became my ingredients, all locally sourced. And then the public itself became participants and co-creators. I also made sure that I worked with the governance body of these spaces. So for the Cubbon Park project, I worked closely with the horticulture department, because how else would I get permissions for these wacko ideas? I worked closely with the metro station, BMRCL in Bangalore, and Art and Transit project to do the wait time project. And I worked closely with the waste pickers of BBMP, the Municipal Corporation of Bangalore, and Hasiudala to make that happen. While I was able to access my agency and make these questions that I had about belonging and the relationship between place and people visible with the people and the governance, I was still lacking and yearning for a collective. And I think that's how I found Govandi. And I got lucky when I started working with the people of Govandi. The 12-year-old Natasha's anger, the 24-year-old Natasha's yearn for a collective, and let me not forget the 18-year-old Natasha's agency that she was looking around in the world, all found home in Govandi. I began working in Govandi in 2019 when I joined Community Design Agency. It's a social design organization run by my dear friend and architect Sandhya Naidu Janardhan. Together, we were establishing a relationship with that community and not just entering with what we wanted to do, but wanted to spend more and more time to understand their reality. Parveen Sheikh, who's a community leader in one of the colonies in Govandi, is fierce and had many ideas to share with us. So we started small and we started looking at that one rehabilitation colony that I spoke to you about earlier through Radhika's story and started working there. Yes, those are the kids I work with now in Govandi. To give you a little context, that Natwar Parekh compound that I spoke to you about was basically built in 2008, where the homeless were displaced into housing when infrastructural developments were taking place in Mumbai city, which means that when roads and bridges were getting built, the people who were living there were moved. Displaced, actually, not moved. And I use this word intentionally because even though the civic authorities were able to move 25,000 people and give them homes, they were unable to, and in fact deprived them of basic resources needed for a good quality of life. This is what it looks like from the top view. Parveen ji has this very poetic way of sharing hard-hitting facts. She says, हवा और धूप जो कुदरत भी हमें मुफ्त में देती है, वो भी हमसे ये डिज़ाइन ने छीन ली. Nature gives us sunlight and ventilation for free, and here this is also taken away from us by design. The rudimentary construction of these buildings leaves little to no space for the residents to interact, and also all the public spaces are usually encroached by parking and garbage, as we spoke about earlier. They have 226 square foot apartments where they live. And there are 3,000 children growing up in this neighborhood in volatile and vulnerable environments. People are usually scared to share their address because they lose onto the opportunities of getting a good job, insurance, or even education opportunities. Now, despite us knowing, and there's evidence that, that adult and child development is heavily impacted by how our childhood experiences have been. There are very, very few tools in the grassroots that help repair this and create well-being-led programs in urban development. In Community Design Agency's eclectic team of architects, social workers, engineers, researchers, I, as an arts practitioner, wanted to develop this. While with the youth, we were able to create a lot of murals, a lot of street interventions, and even a community library, I realized that the undercurrents that were flying between all of these interventions were their need to reclaim their narrative, their identity, and share their lived experiences. How do we reform gaze and rebuild a sense of belonging that has been systemically lost? And I think that was the start of Govandi Arts Festival. Govandi Arts Festival is rooted in creative resistance and expression. It was curated by my friend Bhavna Gemini and myself when we realized that what we are doing here is creating a slow cultural movement and that interdisciplinary discourse that I dreamed of. At the heart of Govandi Arts Festival was the mentorship program, where 40 of our youths were trained in theater, public art, photography, filmmaking, and rap. All of the works that were created were rooted in their sense of identity, home, and self, and exhibited within Govandi Arts Festival and also outside of it. To give you a few examples, Code 43, a band that came out of our Govandi Arts Festival, took their first flight to Delhi to do a performance, and as I speak now, are working with children of disability in a school in Bombay to rap together with them. Sana, who's a 20-year-old filmmaker and also someone who runs the community library, her film, Those 3 Months, which was about her experience of when her mother left her in an orphanage at the age of 11, has been showcasing in Kerala, Delhi, and even New York and LA. The second layer of this festival was the artist residency program. This is where the artists from Mumbai interacted and created together with the creatives of Govandi. And the creatives would mean craftsmen, writers, speakers, researchers, all of it. One of the things that came out of this interaction was a book called Avaz, which is co-written stories between Nisha Nair Gupta, who was one of our artist residents, and writers from Govandi. And this got published earlier this year. The joy of the entire festival was the Lantern Parade, the one-of-its-kind parade which was led by the community, not holding on to any religion or identity, but just mainly because of the joy of living in Govandi. All of them together at the time were hailing Hak se Govandi, which meant loosely, Govandi my pride. All of these activities culminated into a 5-day festival in one of the open grounds that were there. And the city authorities accountable for these conditions and cultural practitioners who would never make their way to Govandi for any creative activities, all of them came together to witness the sheer talent that the youth had to share. This ground before the festival was encroached by parking for 15 years, and after the festival was an open ground. This was one of the biggest achievements because we realized that arts can actually lead to infrastructural developments. My vision for the work that we do at Govandi does not limit itself to just a festival, because I'm very keen on building sustainable long-term tools, which I call ecosystems of care, with arts, learning, and well-being tools, where the leadership of conducting this, taking care of these spaces, is entirely on the people of Govandi, where capacities and leadership are built together. All of this proves that participatory arts and community building has great scaffolding capacity to improve our urban environments the way we'd like, centered around well-being. I'd like to conclude my talk by saying that the systemic issues that we're trying to solve today might take our whole lifetime to get solved, but we join larger and smaller movements of common cause, of freedom, equity, and joy, and create brave spaces one voice at a time. These seeds of change and courage was given to me by my mother, and I see a lot of it sprouting now. And I hope that I continue to create spaces of expression, of safety and agency, where every child feels cared for. Thank you so much.